Hello everyone, this is Unit 4 and the topic is Facilitate Responsible Behaviour. We have quite a bit in this unit. It is quite a large unit and there's some of the topics there, but there are only two assessments. Assessment 4.1 is a knowledge-based, some questions around the theory of what we're talking about here, and Assessment 4.2 is a set of case studies that will be looking at how we can facilitate better behaviour in these young people. Of course, in boarding, quite often parents might think a boarding school would be able to straighten out their child's bad behaviour, and that's what this movie was about. This young girl was an American young girl who was sent away to England to boarding school to magically straighten her out. The title for this unit is given to us by the training package, and they use the word facilitate and responsible behaviour. To make easier is facilitate is to assist and enable better behaviour, and responsible, of course, is having control over, being accountable for being able to make good choices in our behaviour. And that's what our aim is for students, isn't it? At boarding, we want students to leave boarding having developed a code of conduct that fits in with the rest of Australian society, that they'll be accountable, independent and self-determining, and that they'll be able to choose good behaviour for the right reasons. And you'll see in 4.1 that that's your first question there, and I've tried to signal that there's questions each time we come up to something. Question 2 also talks about those shared community values that we hope young people will gain more of from being in boarding, and it asks you also to talk about what are unacceptable behaviours that go opposite to those. Now, one of our first parts in this unit is to talk about how we can assess and observe and monitor young people. This is a crucial part of our role, isn't it? And we need to be able to evaluate a young person's behaviour fairly, objectively and consistently. And through that we build relationships, students trust us, and we're there to recognise potential conflict. We can be ready and available and understand young people and diffuse the tension much quicker. It's part of our duty of care to be able to monitor and support students and be available there on hand. And question 3 talks about this, and there are a lot of good reasons why we're continually monitoring students in our role in the residence. There's a lot of different ways of monitoring students, and question 4 asks you about that. Now, you may not use some of these ways, but I'll show you a couple of tools that you can use for monitoring. And the bottom one's a little bit of a debatable one, but some residents find they even have used social media in some way if they have a boarding residence Facebook page or something like that, and students make comments on there, or parents have seen something happening on the young person's Facebook page and they let us know about it, or a friend does. It's actually a way of monitoring. We have security cameras, and there's a couple more tools here. This is a student feedback tracking tool that some residences use and find very helpful. It might be something you just use at the start of the year, or if you're having difficulties with a particular group of students, you could get them to give you feedback, and it's sort of like they self-monitor. They put a score in the box, how they're feeling, and each week you can track how they're going in these different areas. Another tool for monitoring that we find very helpful is the Tell Your Story form, because we do want feedback from students. When there's an incident, we don't want to only hear what the supervisor saw in the incident report, but we want the student to have opportunity to be able to tell their story, and particularly if there's two different conflicting student stories, we want to get them both. And so you would keep these in the student's file, and by going back you can monitor, has this young person had a lot of these incidences or not, and you can look at these forms and they can be a great monitoring tool. So it's very important that we develop good relationships with young people. We're much better able to support them and to enable them to behave well, because they respond well to us and the relationship we have. So we need to develop that good balance good professional balance in our relationship with young people. We're caring but firm. We're not their best friend, but neither are we the harsh judge or policeman in the residence. Research has found that there are particular characteristics of good interactions with young people, and if our interactions have some of these characteristics, or all of them preferably, then our interactions with young people will support good relationships. So have a read of that section for question 5. And this is the piece of research that's quoted in your notes there. A piece of research in America found that students reacted to requests from adults or teachers or staff. Their reaction depended on the politeness of your request, the fairness of your request, was it a legitimate request, the closeness of your relationship, and how credible you were. Did you have authority? Did you, credibility here is, could they trust you? Did they feel you were smart and that sort of thing, and knew your job and knew what you were doing? There are also 3 tools that we've got in the notes there for you to use to help to know why students might be behaving like they are. And DREIKURS categories, the circle of courage and the compass of shame, are very handy tools. Read more about them in your notes, but there's just a quick summary here. DREIKURS believed that students will misbehave for particular reasons. Young people will, to get attention, to gain power, to seek revenge, or to avoid failure. The second one, the circle of courage, is from a North American Indian perspective and talks a lot about how young people need opportunity to have that sense of belonging, to have opportunity to master new skills and achieve their goals, to grow in independence and personal responsibility, and to have opportunity to contribute to others or become generous, show generosity. And the model says that there's a circle of this based around these 4 characteristics, and if young people are lacking in some area here because of the way they've been treated, then they often can have a broken circle in that area. So I'll show you up closer the belonging aspect. Young people who haven't had a sense of belonging as they've grown up and as they're fitting into the boarding even, they might feel rejected and unattached and lonely and distrustful, and then become loyal to a gang or something because they're craving affection and acceptance from somebody else. Or if the generosity one is missing or distorted or absent, and the mastery and that sort of thing, and you can see those in the notes. The third tool we can use is the compass of shame, and this is from the restorative practice model, which is talked about a bit more in your notes, so you'll see it a bit further on in this unit as well. But in this model, it says that young people will withdraw or attack or avoid if they're feeling shamed about their behaviour by the way that they are approached and treated by adults or staff or other young people. So there's a lot of factors that are very crucial to developing a really positive climate in the boarding residence. And based around some research by these 3 people here, you'll see in section 4.5, page 11, that there are a lot of factors that are crucial to develop a positive climate in boarding, and here are some of them here, and again you can find them in your notes. So a staff member does need to have assertive behaviours, and we can model good assertive behaviour where we are able to express our beliefs, our opinions and our needs, and young people can learn to be like that too as we model that. But sometimes you may not feel very assertive. You might have a certain anxiety around being assertive in certain areas, but research has shown that the more you learn to make assertive responses, the weaker your anxiety will get over that. So if you practice being assertive, you'll get better at it. There's a little self-assessment in question 8 around these assertive techniques, and that can be a good little tool to examine how your interactions are in boarding. Occasionally, young people might get aggressive, and if we're out there available and observant and engaged and alert to the signs of that young people are showing, we will be able to intervene early because we anticipate aggressive behaviour. We might see it coming. And so when it does occur and there's some hostile communication happening, we need to be able to remain calm and respond professionally at all times. And this shows the young person they can't, abuse you. They can't get a reaction out of you. You don't take it personally. You're going to stay calm and professional. And if you respond with empathy, you ask them about, why are they feeling like this, or how I can see that you're angry, I can see you're upset by this. You acknowledge their feelings and you respond with empathy. That does tend to soak up tension and hostility, and it really shows that you care and you're willing to hear them out. And they may not have a lot of people doing that for them. Sometimes there are cultural responses from young people in our residence, and sometimes the way young people respond is culturally programmed almost into them, or they have it because of a different type of cultural background. And so we need to be alert to some of the ways young people behave and look at it and say, is there some way I can respond to this which acknowledges that, hey, you might have a different background in this area. Let's have a look and see what's causing this behaviour. And of course then we're observant and aware, we're prepared, and we need to respond to behaviours of concern. And if we can work with young people that they know the right reasons to make choices, if they respond out of respect for others, if they value relationships, they respect themselves and they care about property and care about the residents and care about each other, then they will respond right for the right reasons. There are two different models there's a lot of models actually of how we work with young people and manage their behaviour and respond to them. But the two extremes, I guess, that's why I just call it two models, but there's things in between here. The two extremes are where in a residence we might use a traditional adversarial approach towards misbehaviour, where we single out the young person, or they get blamed for something and they are punished. We just dole out a consequence, and that's the way we handle it. And that's the traditional adversarial approach, where the first thing we do when something goes wrong is we say, what's happened? And we say, who is to blame here? And how will they be punished, and what's that punishment going to be? And that's the traditional adversarial approach. Now, going back again to the other model, at the other end of the spectrum, I guess, is the restorative model, where we want to look at young people and we want to give them as much self-regulation as possible so that they learn to take responsibility for their own behaviour and make good choices. And the restorative approach really helps us to ask the students these questions. I'll just go over to it. We ask them, what's happened in this situation? How has what you've done affected each person, or how has it affected the person that you've offended, and what needs to happen to make things right? And when you look at the social discipline window, if we respond to young people in the restorative box up on the right hand corner, we have firm control and we set limits, and we also are supportive and we nurture and encourage. Then we'll do things with young people. We'll talk to them in this way. We won't be just doling out punishment, which is more on the control side than the support side. So the important thing with the restorative approach is that we help the young person to think through what they've done and what will make it better. And this can be just a short little question informally, as we look at a young person, we ask them, what's that going to do, or how are you going to fix that? Or you might need to go into a larger restorative conference, especially if there's multiple people involved and several young people have had a fight or something like that. They're in a disagreement, then you get them together and you ask them these questions. And again, this works in really well with the Tell Your Story form, because you have the same questions on this Tell Your Story form. What happened? Who's been affected by what you've done, and what can you do to make it better? And in that, we're really trying to have the consequences of their action be very closely related to their offence. They're very logical. They will try and make things better for the other person. They'll try and restore relationships if we do it this way. And the more we empower students to self-regulate, to think about these consequences and have to make things better, not just take a punishment, then we empower students to be self-regulating. We might have to step back and not just go in straight away and apply a consequence as the first resort, but talk with the students more one-on-one, privately, use the restorative questions, and encourage students to know that anything they do wrong or against the code of conduct, they're going to have to try and fix it and make it better. And this encourages a whole lot of problem-solving skills. Of course, we also need to choose our battles, and sometimes some behaviour that young people do in the residence is not that serious. It's not going to be breaking a policy or a law. It might be something that can actually be ignored if it's not going to be very serious. And in doing that, we can save ourselves for the battles that are worth fighting, as long as we're consistent. And that's why I've put this picture here about the coffee and sugar. At one residence we saw this, where the kitchen staff were that angry about the teaspoons going missing that they issued an edict that there's going to be no Milo, no tea, no coffee for a week because all the teaspoons are gone missing again. Until they came up with this really creative idea. They decided it was not a battle that they should be taking on, but they could come up with a better way of approaching that battle. So there's some good helpful rules of compliance in your notes that can help us to work with young people to ensure their best behaviour, that we facilitate good behaviour by making sure our requests are fair, reasonable, clear and polite, and that we do expect students to comply. We never accept non-compliance, so if there's a rule or they've been asked to do something and they don't comply, we don't just shrug our shoulders and not accept it. We always try and remind young people before we act, remind and warn them before we act, make sure our battles are worth fighting, and if you threaten something, you must carry it out. Unfortunately, sometimes there is a lot of behaviours of concern. Anything we call behaviours of concern is things that are unsafe, violent, destructive or very inappropriate behaviour, and it's essential that we don't let these go unchallenged, but we intervene and challenge these behaviours. And question 12 asks you to give an example of a behaviour of concern you've had to deal with this past week or so, and outline how you spoke to the students, what you would say and do to challenge the student to change, to positively encourage them, and what kind of clear, calm, objective language you can use when you do that. So have a go at that question and see if you might be something you've already done or something you can practice. We always want to anticipate aggressive behaviour before it occurs, and how can we do that? Of course, reading body language, noticing tension, is the noise level gone up, that sort of things, and getting to know our students will become aware of their triggers and what does upset certain students. The more we do that, we're able to intervene earlier. And so there's some little techniques or strategies that we can use. For question 13, you might like to use some of these in your answer. Engage, don't enrage. So the more you engage with the young person's feelings and acknowledge them and use empathy, the less they'll be enraged. Encouraging them to physically move or use some physical movement to dispel their tension before they become aggressive. Use a light touch, just give a look or a smile or a move towards a young person and whisper quietly. That will always be a lighter touch than approaching them aggressively and speaking out loud and angrily. Divide and conquer means, of course, separate students who are having problems or remove the audience away from a student who's going off in some way. Remove the audience. That will help to divide and conquer. And always use your listening is a great tool. There's other tools here that you might like to use, and they are staying calm and using a light touch, we've already said, but moving slowly, allowing space. Those kinds of tools are pretty crucial. So have a read through those for question 13. On some rare occasions, of course, we might need to intervene in a physical way to restrain a young person. When would we have to do that and how? The only time we should do it is if the student is about to hurt themselves or somebody else. And how? How do we physically restrain a young person? There's only really one acceptable way, and that is to intervene in kind of a bear hug, preferably from behind, that holds their arms down by their bodies. You should never pull on their arms or push them down or force them, shove them, that sort of thing. You might be able to put something in their way if they're about to hurt somebody else, a cushion or a door or any object available to get between the two people to prevent physical harm of somebody. But there are some rules around physical intervention, and residences need to almost train staff. We need to know how to do this if we are in a place where we need to do this. So have a read of those. There's also a reminder about that protective practices resource that's very good. Of course, if you have to intervene physically with a young person, you need to make a report, of course, and document that. But any kind of student behaviour of concern will need us to keep good reports and a record of what's been said and done. Try and document both sides of the story, and also follow your organisation's documenting and reporting requirements. And then the other important thing is that we maintain currency of these documents. So if things change or if there's an update on a student's behaviour, we need to keep going in and updating their files and making sure that the current story is the one that comes foremost in the files. And that's really extremely important because we need to have very fair processes. Decisions might be made on the basis of the documentation that you've put in the student's file or given to the head of boarding, and it must be extremely fair, follow proper procedures, because decisions can be made that have a long-term impact on a young person's behaviour. We should follow the Ombudsman's 4 rules, and these are in the notes. We should have an appropriate hearing, particularly if this is going to have long-term consequences for the student. Suspension or expulsion, those kinds of things. We need evidence and have a proper inquiry. And there's an interesting little story here about some young boys who were going to a rowing regatta in New Zealand, and 2 boys were encouraged by their peers to ride on the baggage carousel at the airport while the coach was off getting the hire van or something. And, they breached the secure baggage area, and the airport security staff and the police came and interviewed them, but they didn't take any further action. But the college decided to suspend the boys then and there, immediately sending them home and banning them from the competition. Now, when the parents heard about that, they weren't too pleased about it and immediately contacted their lawyers. They contacted the school, and the upshot of it was that the parents were able to get a High Court injunction because they felt that the college hadn't used a fair process, that the decision was serious and disproportionate, and so the injunction from the High Court stopped the school from banning them from the competition. 3 hours before they were due to compete, they were allowed to compete. And this was because the court determined that the decision was made on the basis of somebody who wasn't present at the incident. The boys weren't interviewed properly, the witnesses weren't interviewed, and the information about the consequences of the decision wasn't gathered. So all in all, we need to make sure we have procedural fairness in our boarding residence. We need to make sure that the complaint or the accusation is made clear to the students and the parents, that the school hears both sides of the story, that the young people are given a chance to present their case, that the decision's made by an unbiased decision maker, and that the decision maker acts reasonably. And again, that little tell your story form is very helpful in this. So that should help you to do question 15, and there's plenty in your notes on that. At this point, it might be helpful to you to stop this, if you can stop it at this point, and you might find doing assessment 4.2 works in well at this stage, because of all the types of scenarios that come up in 4.2 might be very applicable here. If you think about the using the restorative approach, if possible, always knowing your policy, how it works. Think about the rules of compliance and how you could respond using those rules of compliance, and also making sure you're procedurally fair in your response in those answers. The last section is to do with the behaviour of concern of a young person who may be showing suicidal thoughts or ideation or intent. And unfortunately, this is very prevalent around Australia, and every year there are a lot of suicides per 100,000, and a lot of people are dying. It is decreasing, actually, this is statistics of suicide around Australia, but not amongst Indigenous people, sadly. The statistics are rising there, and they have a 4.9% higher than the national rate. And this is for a lot of different reasons. You can read more about that in the notes, and also this wonderful story of this lady who was able to massively impact the suicidal rate in her community. So, if there's that many suicides happening in Australia, there's going to be a proportion of young people every day thinking about suicide or attempting it. And so we need to be aware of this and alert for signs of this in our boarding residence. There's a really excellent podcast which you may be able to find. I think the whole reference is in the notes, by Professor Graham Martin from the Centre for Suicide Studies. And he not only talks about self-harm. Sorry, I'll skip through that because it's talking over the top of me and I wasn't able to stop that. But he says connection is protection. And if we want to protect young people from suicide, then we need to ensure that they are really well connected. And they may often cry out for help by attempting suicide in a way that means they are going to be rescued, that makes rescue possible, and that is a cry for help, and we need to respond and take these attempts really seriously and give them the help that they need. It's not attention-seeking behaviour, it's a cry for help. And these are some of the protective factors that are what we need to strengthen in young people. Some young people are at higher risk than others, and these three groups of young people are at much higher risk of suicide than other young people. And here are some of the indicators. There's a larger list than this, of course, in your notes. And so if we observe some of these indicators in a young person, we start to get concerned, then we need to do something. Of course, a young person may show signs of depression before they show signs of any suicidal ideation. So if a young person is just appearing depressed and we are monitoring them, then that's early intervention and we should be able to avoid any further development. But we should monitor closely, discuss and document this not leave them alone too much, encourage activity, connection, show you care, listen with empathy, and access some help for them early through support, a care plan or a referral. And then, of course, we need to keep observing them. If they come out of that and they seem to be going well and they're rising out of that, then there's no further danger. But if we watch them and they still seem to be going down, and we can't afford to leave them for too long, because, of course, then that depression can further develop and into some sort of suicide risk for this young person. So we should definitely refer that young person and not leave them alone. That means if a student is a suicide risk, if we do believe they are at risk, then we mustn't leave them alone, even in the bathrooms, toilets, late at night. We need to ask them the question. Ask them a question. Are they thinking of harming themselves, killing themselves, or are they thinking of not living anymore? Those kinds of questions. There's some other questions, and you should actually try verbalising what sort of question would you use in this situation. Try practising it out loud. And then, of course, somewhere there we need to refer them immediately and get professional help and develop a care plan for them. By this time you might have them to the hospital, and then head of boarding, of course, might be discussing your concerns with the parents, and, of course, continuing to monitor. So we need to follow all these points, particularly when we're referring. We need to follow our boarding residence procedure, and if it's late at night and we can't keep an eye on that young person all through the night, then we need to get them to the hospital or get them to the emergency department, get them assessed by a doctor. If it's in the day, we might be able to refer them to other professional help like the school psychologist, counsellor, headspace, help like that. Of course, then it's very critical that our documentation is really spot on here, that we do our report of concern or incident reports, our referral documentation. And a young person, if they're in boarding and their behaviour is disconcerting, then we need to be case managing them, developing an individual safety plan. Their file needs to be kept up very regularly, updated, and somebody, a designated person, their mentor or their case manager, needs to keep progressing and reviewing those notes in conjunction with the supports that they're getting from their referrals. So that's the end. I hope you've been able to follow all of that and that you go well with assessments 4.1 and 4.2. Thank you very much.